really passionate about design and collaboration. And through design or collaborative design, we can create great user experience, dramatically lower the amount of effort involved in development, increase predictability, and importantly, have more fun. So specifically today, I want to talk about how do you integrate design into Agile, and how do you use that to make great user experience. But first I want to define a few terms. The first one is user experience is not UI. So oftentimes in the industry, we mix these up and that's fine, but for sure user interface is part of user experience, but it's not the whole enchilada. So there's something much, much bigger about user experience. Don Norman, who's a design guru and author, wrote this about user experience. It encompasses all aspects of the end user's interaction with the company, its services, and its products. So that's quite expansive. So with all this understanding of user experience, it means that your customer service representative is part of user experience. That makes sense. For sure the performance, but also things like any interaction with the service. So then who becomes responsible for user experience? And it's clear that everyone is responsible for the quality of the user experience, and that means you as developers or business people or customer service representatives. So what do I mean by great user experience? This is what I call the pyramid of delight. And it defines the three attributes that I attribute to great user experience. At the very bottom, we start with, is something useful? So does it solve a real problem? And you'd be surprised by how many Valley startups fail to actually achieve this very basic thing. The second one is about, is it usable? So when it solves a problem, do I figure out how to use it? So there are hundreds of technical writers now unemployed because we no longer need to write user manuals. So this is a great thing because the competition is very steep. And if someone actually has to spend time learning how to use your product, then you've lost already because someone out there is going to make something that's more usable. Now, the top one is touchy. Delight is a human emotion. So how does a product make me feel? Does it make me feel happy? Does it make me feel empowered? Does it give me an endorphin rush when I crush the candy? So these are types of things that are involved in user delight. And this applies to everything, from enterprise software to video games. So the same principles can be applied no matter what kind of software you're making. Okay, so to sum all that up, this is what user experience should be. To define useful, easy-to-use experiences that delight end users, are practical to build, and further the business goals of your company. Because after all, you all want to be successful, right? So here's an example. I love this example because I think people can relate to it. This is Tinder. If you haven't played with this, I promise I haven't to my wife. I've only watched people use this, but it is completely embodies what I mean by the three types of attributes to great user experience. So let's start at the bottom. Is it functional? Is it useful? And I think the answer is yes. It probably is the most rudimentary of all needs of all of us, which is how to find a mate. So absolutely, it is useful. What about usable? Well, they're the ones who populated swipe right, swipe left. I can't think of an easier way to find a date than moving your finger. So most certainly, this does meet the criteria for usable. And now about delightful. So here's where they win, and this is where they've dominated, where others have come before. Not only is it fun to do this kind of swipe right, swipe left, I think there is something, I haven't seen the research on this, but there's probably some endorphin rush just by sorting these cards, yes, no. Of course, there's a much larger endorphin rush that's available if you are successful, but we're not talking about that today. Okay, so now, delightful experiences. So this is important. Delightful experiences are something that are beyond what your end users can imagine. Because if you're developing something exactly as your end users want, then you've kind of already failed. You need to go beyond that to create delight. Henry Ford famously said, if I had asked my users or my customers what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. And of course, this is the guy that brought us the mass production of automobiles. So it's important to understand what your customers want, but you deliver something that's beyond that. Now let's talk about collaborative design and how this can be integrated into Agile. Okay, the key thing to remember is that you want to focus on the shared understanding between the different parties, right? And this also has to do with lean methodology, if this is something you're applying. So it's important that you understand what you're trying to build and that you have this common vision. And then from there, other things can follow. Great ideas, tricks, all kinds of user experience feedback and things like that I'll go into. In fact, to explain that, I'm going to put up a little chart I made. This is a chart of the different types of actions. Over here next to the man's head, you will see what says product development sprint N. This is the sprint that we're normally used to. And as you can see, engineering is this blue line here at the bottom. And you see in sprint N, engineering is at maximum effort. So this is what we know, right? So when I'm in the middle of the sprint, engineering is putting out the most. Design is supporting them by creating, or making sure that all the different assets and edge cases are taken care of that come up during daily scrums, and product managers are in there helping out as well. But how do you get there? This is the question that you need to answer in collaborative design. So I've labeled product design phase. This is somehow one sprint or mini sprints before, and I call it sprint N-1. And then there's a product planning phase, sprint N-2. So as you can see where the circles are, each of the different phases has a different group of people that are at the maximum effort. So, like, this is what I really want to talk about. This hump right here in the middle of the product design phase on engineering. This is where engineers and designers work together. Now, if you think about how you normally might put this together, this might be some kind of smooth curve between down here when you're talking about use cases and sprints and epics, and up there where you're doing maximum effort. So here is where we're having meetings back and forth. So as a designer, I put together some flows, I put together some ideas on how to solve a problem, but importantly, I need feedback from engineers, because not only do you have the knowledge of the technology and how it's built, and what's easy and what's native to this type of experience, you also have good ideas, and good ideas come from anyone. All right, so at the end of each of these sprints then, we know what happens at the end of a product development sprint. We make demoable or deployable software, but before that, the purpose of this, these pre-sprints are creating wireframes and graphics, but also importantly, estimates. Well, this is where there is a problem often when we're doing agile development, that without understanding the full overall experience of what you're trying to build, you're doing estimates, and your story points are there, and you're off. And somewhere in the middle of sprint N, the designer comes to you and says, hey, that's not what I meant. And then the developer gets upset because it's totally not what they conceived of building, and it's actually much, much more expensive than they originally thought. So to avoid that, we have this hump. And throughout the product design phase, we're talking feedback, and I'll go more into that. But the other time that collaboration becomes really important is in the planning phase, where you take business requirements or you take user goals and you turn them into sprints and eventually epics. And this is where you create the flows. And again, we're collaborating back and forth with product managers and engineers. So there are several key moments which collaboration happen. This is not all of them, but these are some really important ones. Business goals I talked about, persona and goals. This is UX research. I don't even have enough time to go into that, but that's a whole other 20-minute talk. But this is the one I want to talk about, or rather these two, UX concept design and what I call UX pre-flight review. So these are two critical meetings that need to happen prior to the start of a development sprint. So when do those happen and what do they look like? So the concept design happens all throughout this planning phase. So this is where you're sitting around and you're trying to figure out what stories to write and how they work. So you're working with a designer and you're sketching out flows, and you're sketching out how a customer goes through an interaction with your company or with your software. So this is really important because although it doesn't define the whole user experience, it defines the direction for the user experience, and now we have this shared understanding, which is something I talked about in the beginning. What does that look like? Here's some examples from a previous company that I had. It's not important what's actually there, but we have 4 screens here. The first one is the default state, the next one is an edit mode, the next one is what happens when you save your edits, and then the next one is what happens when you go back to something that's already been edited. So you can see quickly, I've sketched out basically the 4 different states this UI can exist in, and we have a shared understanding. Now, this didn't happen the first time I drew it. This was the output of an entire hour of brainstorming. In this particular case, I had 2 developers. There was a lead front-end developer. There was the lead back-end developer. So the back-end developer was there because we were going to change the way the APIs worked. That's really important. And of course, we had product manager. Here's another example. Again, just showing how rudimentary these sketches are. So if you can draw a box and you can draw some arrows, you basically can draw one of these things. It's not hard. Okay, so that was concept design. The next one is this pre-flight review, and you can see it takes place during this big spike in effort right before a sprint, or sometimes right after a sprint, depending on how you manage your Agile process. And this is where you're doing estimates. Okay, so a lot of times we're a little bit hesitant to bring the UI in detail into the estimate process, and this is because UI reviews take a long time, and often it goes into some unknown directions, and you're brainstorming different ideas, and this can be expensive. But remember, you've got the hump in the middle of the product design sprint. And so everyone, including the QE or QA people, are already familiar with this design. So here we're just talking about the shared understanding of what it is that we're building. And so it really doesn't take that much time if you do it right. So UX pre-flight. Here's what that might look like. This is, again, back to this lean methodology of not creating much documentation. This is just how a tag UI works. So you've got on one side, if I hit the tag button and there's no content, and down below there's the row of if I have tags, how does that work? And then here are all the different states. So just a simple grid that lets the engineer know how the UI behaves. This is a wireframe, and I've got just a few notes on the side, and I've blocked out the different modules. I didn't even bother filling in content on this. And then finally, the finished UI, which is some graphic design. This is done in Photoshop, but of course nowadays we use Sketch and other tools that are a little bit faster. So that happens during the pre-flight stage. So far, we've talked about the continuity between what to build all the way through to the actual sprint. But let's look at a single time slice. What am I doing during that sprint, that 2 or 3 weeks that you're working on something? So first of all, for sure you're working on the actual development, right? So this is your regular sprint. And during that regular sprint, you have daily scrum. And involved in the daily scrum are designers who are there to help out to make sure that they haven't forgotten stuff. I mean, nobody's perfect, right? So we sometimes miss graphics, sometimes we miss an edge case. However, designers themselves have their own sprint that's going on. This is where we're having our maximum effort. And so we've got the design sprint. And maybe it's one sprint behind, or rather preparing one sprint ahead. Or maybe it's 2, it doesn't matter. But the important thing here is that we have a shared daily scrum. So when we show up to the daily scrum, we want to answer questions and help you unlock yourselves from your work. And likewise, we need engineering help to unlock us for our flows, our designs, our user experience. And all along, we're also thinking in the background about what's happening next. So, in summary, UX is a responsibility of everyone. You want to focus on that shared understanding. Good ideas come from anyone and anywhere. Participate in concept design and design reviews. This is really important for engineering. I know that it takes time, but you have to do it if you want to make better products. Integrate the pre-flight into your sprint estimating process. and reserve time for participating in this process. So, my message, make better products through design and collaboration. Thank you.
I think this was the coolest trick you ever pulled off, telling your wife you're using like a dating app to like explore UX.
That's right.
So
it was a job requirement.
The next thing is that you need to buy a Porsche. And when you're in the midlife crisis, because you really need to explore the UX of the Porsche.
Yes.
So that's fantastic. So the one question which I have for you before we're setting up the next talk is, what is the single product right now where you're most excited about the UX that they've created? None of them that you've created, obviously.
Yeah. Let's see. I think it would have to be the Google autonomous car. And the reason is that what happens to a vehicle when you don't have to interact with it anymore other than to tell it where you want to go. I'm really excited about how these things will shape out. And we don't know how it's going to happen, but I'm excited about it.
That's excellent. I'm very excited about that too. Thank you so much, Eric.
All right. Thank you.